Hey YouTube. Today I saw a video from an MMT advocate trying to explain hyperinflation, and I wanted to give my thoughts on some of the things that he said. So, hyperinflation is a very important topic, and let's start with some definitions. So, inflation is a rise in prices caused by an increase in the money supply, and that's a definition that will cause some argument, some conflict, but I'm not going to get into that right now. We're just going to go with that. Hyperinflation is very rapid increases in prices brought upon by monetary expansion. So we're used to inflation of like 2 to 3% per year. Actually, it's more than that. So even assuming the government accurately measures inflation, um, there's a bit of expected deflation in a modern capitalist economy because every year the economy gets more productive, it produces more stuff, so the price should go down. So if CPI increases, and CPI is only one measure of prices, by the way. So well, it's important in the sense that that's how people experience inflation. It also might not tell the whole story if, for example, all the money is going into the purchase of new homes, and so asset prices are going up because of the expanding money supply. Anyway, that's a bit of a tangent, not super important. But we're used to CPI increases of like 2 to 3% per year, what people call inflation of 2 to 3% per year. And under hyperinflation, you could have 1,000% a year, 10,000. It can get to extreme numbers. So that's obviously very problematic. And we've heard stories of during the Weimar Republic, they would have wheelbarrows full of banknotes of money, that they're using to purchase a loaf of bread because the money's become worthless. So the first thing to do when you're confronted with a topic like hyperinflation is let's review the academic literature. And one of the scholars who studied hyperinflation was a man named by Peter Bernholz, who actually passed away recently at the ripe young age of 95. He was a professor at the University of Basel, a pioneer in the field of public choice theory, and he had a long and illustrious career in economics. So, one of the things that Peter covered in his book on monetary regimes and inflation was that in basically almost every case, you had budget deficits greater than 20% of expenditures. And these deficits were financed through the banking system by creating new money. Usually, the case is the government runs into severe financial trouble. In the Weimar Republic, there were severe reparations to pay. In Venezuela, the economy was dependent upon oil revenues to bring in foreign money that could be exchanged for imported goods. And of course, the nationalization of large parts of the economy didn't help. Um, he doesn't go into Chile here. I guess maybe Chile never quite made it to hyperinflation territory, but Allende's nationalization of the economy led to very high inflation, triple digit inflation. Um, so so the economy is in trouble, revenues are in trouble, and they think, well, we'll just print money and spend it, and that's going to solve everything. but actually it just makes things so much worse. All right, so hyperinflation is when governments print too much money and basically devalues everyone's savings, ruins the economy. So, how does this relate to MMT? Well, the MMT claim is that governments should run deficits which are financed by monetary expansion. They claim this won't lead to inflation so long as you have unemployed resources and unemployed people. This claim is patently false. Deficits that are financed by monetary expansion will lead to higher prices, regardless of whether you're at full employment or quote unquote full employment of resources. Not really a thing, but doesn't matter. Deficit spending financed by printing money is going to cause inflation. The only question is how much, and that's going to be determined by how much money you print, how large of a deficit they run. Now, it's possible to run deficits that aren't inflationary. That's if instead of relying on the banking system and creating the money, you borrow real savings, either domestically or abroad. I'm still not in favor of deficit spending in that context, but at least it's not inflationary.
Inflation. We remember them because the examples of hyperinflation are so rare that they stand out in our memory.
I get the impression that advocates of MMT aren't exactly steeped in economic history. Here's a comprehensive list of hyperinflation incidents that occurred during the 20th century. You'll note that the highest monthly inflation rate is so high, it has to be expressed in scientific notation. It's not really intelligible in ordinary decimal format because there's so many zeros. That's for Hungary, which is actually number one on the list, and then Zimbabwe, which we're more familiar with because it wasn't that long ago. You can see the daily inflation rate in Hungary was 207%, which is pretty wild to think about it. Like the next day, prices are double or triple what they were originally. But even at the very bottom of the list, you're looking at daily inflation rates of 1.48%, and that's cumulative. So Kazakhstan saw the highest monthly inflation rate, and this is the lowest on the list. Uh, the crisis reached its epoch at 55.5% monthly inflation. So that's the first thing. It's just not that rare. I mean, there's 30, 40 names on this list. Uh, that's a sizable percentage of the number of countries there are in the world. You see a lot dating to the 1990s when the Soviet Union split up. But a lot of these aren't that distant. Brazil, Congo, Angola, even Chile only 50 years ago, Peru not very long ago. Of course, like everything, it depends on context. It's not like hyperinflation is common, but it's hardly as rare as this guy seems to think. Now, I don't really recommend you watch this video. There's basically nothing of substance or value here. This guy's just a total idiot. To his credit, he does acknowledge that money printing did have at least some role.
And I am not disputing that that was at least in part because all of those governments did, of course, print far too much money. But
You think?
that wasn't the fundamental problem within those countries
It really was.
that gave rise to their economic disaster.
So then he launches into a series of elaborate caveats in which MMT doesn't apply or doesn't work, which makes you wonder, like, if there's all these preconditions, then how exactly is it a descriptive? Because that's their claim. That's not even prescriptive, it's descriptive. It's just saying how the world works. But then why does it only apply, like, when your currency is the reserve currency of the world or whatever?
Let's look at what modern monetary theory says is necessary to have a properly functioning economy which runs its own currency. Because it's really important to understand those conditions. Because when they don't apply, of course, modern monetary theory doesn't apply either. And those conditions are that the government in question must be strong. In other words, it must have popular support. It must be upheld by the rule of law. It
I really don't see the relevance there or what he's even talking about. The government must be strong,
must be respected.
must be respected. Like, it just seems completely irrelevant to the issue of currency and banking and hyperinflation, whether or not the government is strong or respected.
It must
It seems like a red herring.
also have its own central bank. Or, in the case of the Eurozone, be an active participant in a currency zone where there is a strong central bank. It must be able to operate an efficient tax system, because if it doesn't have such a tax system, it can't recover the money from the economy that it has spent.
Yeah, that's what these countries were lacking: taxes. If they'd only taxed harder, they wouldn't have had hyperinflation. I mean, this guy's just a complete joke. But that's another wacky thing that MMT claims, is that taxes give money its value, which is absurd. Money has value because people accept it, because it can be used to purchase goods and services. It's a medium of exchange. That's its role. You produce wealth, or in most people's cases, you help a company produce wealth. They handle, you do your little part, you're your cog in the machine. They do the rest, but it's still the same thing. You produce wealth, real goods, or a service, and then you trade it to other people for goods or services that they make. That's what an economy is. That's what's going on. Uh, so, no, money doesn't get its value because you have to give it to the government. That's what they claim. That's their argument. And that if the government wasn't taxing us, the money would have no value. In fact, money arises organically in the marketplace. It has nothing to do with the government. The government sort of takes it over. And a perfect counterfactual to this is, uh, the money in colonial America was just imported coins from Europe. The silver dollar was the go-to coin because it was of higher quality than some of the Spanish silver dollar, than some of the other coins in circulation. So it traded at a premium, uh, but that's the money that the people of the colonies used. I mean, there was also, like in Virginia, they used tobacco as money. Commodity money is how money originates, because when you have, like, a barter is really inefficient. So people choose the most commonly desired commodity, which varies from economy to economy. And colonial Virginia, it was tobacco. Usually it's gold or silver for reasons because these metals possess certain moneyish qualities. Uh, but yeah, this is just that MMT wackiness where he's saying that money gets its value because of taxes. No, money gets its value. I mean, people aren't getting up in the morning and going to work so they can pay taxes. That's not their goal. They're getting up and going to work so that they can get a paycheck and they can pay their rent and they can buy groceries. Taxes are something you pay so that the government doesn't hurt you, you know? But the primary reason why people participate in the market economy in the first place is just to get money to trade it for goods and services. And so another thing that MMT people claim is that taxes are deflationary, which again is nonsense because taxes do not decrease the amount of money in circulation. Inflation is when you add more money in circulation. So think of it like, okay, think of it like this. Like, you know those places you can take your kids and they play games. If they do well in the game, then they get a bunch of tickets and they can trade those tickets in for like toys or whatever. Okay, so that's sort of what money is. It's these tickets that can be exchanged for goods, but how many goods you get for one ticket for $20 depends on the amount of money that's in circulation. And this is simple supply and demand. So, like, supply and demand teaches us that the greater the supply of something, if demand stays the same, the lower the price. I mean, imagine like everybody had, for whatever reason, hundreds of bananas, okay? The price of bananas would plummet because nobody wants to buy bananas. They have more bananas than they know what to do with. They know they're going to go bad. Nobody would be interested in purchasing bananas. So the price would drop dramatically. That's supply and demand. Obviously, uh, we don't all magically get hundreds of bananas. That's not how things work. But the point is, when there's a greater supply of stuff relative to the demand, that adjusts the price. So you can think of course, we think of if you're buying a chair, you can think of the price of the chair in dollars, but it works the other way around too. So you can buy a chair for $50, or you can buy $50 with a chair. But just like as the supply of a good increases, then its value goes down or its price. Uh, as the supply of money increases, then the amount of goods you can get with it decreases because there's less demand for money, or the demand stayed the same and the supply is increased dramatically. Okay, so taxes aren't deflationary because they don't decrease the amount of money that's in the economy, because the government takes that money that they taxed and they spend it again. So it doesn't do anything to decrease the money supply. Anyway, he continues with situations under which MMT doesn't apply.
That it has spent. It must have a sufficiently large government sector that the government's demand to be paid in the form of taxation basically forces the currency that the government creates into use in that economy.
Yeah, I don't think that Venezuela's problem was that they didn't have enough government. Okay.
For everyday exchange. If there are parallel currencies operating in a country, it's very difficult to enforce any form of monetary policy. The currency in question must also be acceptable for international trade. That's vital. Because if it isn't accepted for international trade, then the country is wholly dependent upon its ability to make export sales to buy the currency that it requires to pay for its imports.
But the reason why nobody wants these currencies is because of the hyperinflation, because the government's printing too much money.
Whereas if the currency is available and acceptable for international trade, then it can effectively trade internationally on credit. And that allows it to therefore ride out the inevitable troughs and highs that exist with regard to the economic fortunes of any country.
I mean, if you look at Canada and the US, our two countries have had some highs and lows, and it's true the exchange rate varies, but it doesn't vary to that degree, because neither country is engaged in hyperinflationist policies. So it's not like your currency is just going to lose, a substantial amount of its value because of an economic downturn or something like that.
Finally, and very significantly, there must be no sanctions against trade with that country and no bars on the use of its currency, and it mustn't be the victim of war or some other deep political circumstance that means it's basically a pariah within the international community.
You see, he's given like a whole bunch of conditions here, and that that just begs the question: why there's so many preconditions under which MMT doesn't work? And I feel like he's just engaged in an elaborate series of apologetics for what is fundamentally a broken ideology. What MMT people advocate for is massive, massive government deficits. Deficits that are financed not through real savings, but by inflationary monetary policy. That's what caused hyperinflation in all those countries. We saw the list from Peter Bernholz's book. They all had deficits that were greater than 20% of expenditures. And just to be clear, what MMT advocates are saying is they want deficits that are like 10%, 15% of GDP. They want just absolutely unsustainable amounts of deficit spending. They love inflation, they love debt, and their policies are 100% hyperinflationary, which is why they get that reaction. But really, what he's trying to do is obfuscate the very simple fact that inflation is when you print too much money, hyperinflation is when you print way too much money. It's that simple. But because MMT advocates are fundamentally inflationists, they have to do this whole song and dance of, oh, well, in that case, and yada, 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 it won't work under X and Y and Z conditions. Like, it is true that if there's a huge demand for your currency, then to some degree you can engage in expansionary monetary policy without feeling the effects. The dollar as the reserve currency of the world, the fact that there's such international demand for dollars, for U.S. Treasury certificates. And Japan saw this as well with the yen trading bloc, where to a degree, Japan was able to export inflation to South Korea via investment and throughout Southeast Asia as well. But that ended up with a whole host of new problems. And we see today the consequences of Japan's love affair with debt. They have by far the largest debt level of the developed world. It's true that the Weimar Republic had to pay reparations, that things were pretty bad. The war damaged German industrial capabilities, and there were land concessions in the Versailles Treaty. Aside from that, Germany had elected a left wing government, which was very much in favor of social spending, government spending on the people. But that doesn't mean hyperinflation was inevitable. It was a choice made by German politicians to print unlimited amounts of money instead of trying to work with the budgets that they had. And again, that's exactly what these MMT nutters advocate for. Unlimited deficit spending constrained only by unemployment of people and unemployment of resources. And since there's always available resources, it's constrained by nothing. So if you look at the quantity of money in circulation in the Weimar Republic, it was at 8.6 billion May 1923. The next year, in April, the total money had doubled to 17.34 billion. And then by August of that year, the amount of money in circulation was 670 billion, more than 35 times the amount of money. So, yeah, if you increase the money supply by 3,500%, prices are going to increase. There's a finite amount of goods available in the economy. Just because you created 3,000 times as much money doesn't mean there's 3,000 times as much goods. By November, it had reached 400 quintillion. So yeah, in conclusion, MMT advocates are dumb. MMT is dumb. Deficit spending, when financed through the banking system, is inflationary, and massive amounts of money printing causes hyperinflation. That's all you need to know on this subject. Zach out.